climate and how we build the relationships in our schools that will make students feel engaged, wanted, and included. And this requires a great deal of rethinking about how we deliver instruction to engage our students differently. And I think that from our point of view at the Department of Education, we have been singling this issue out very carefully for close to 3 years to talk about engagement in new ways, specifically how we can build a strong school culture and build a system of supports for students, particularly secondary schools students, when they enter into that pipeline or pathway that will take them through high school and into college, that we are there to provide direct mentoring service, support, building student success plans, and surrounding the climate or the school community with what we characterize as a system of supports to help families help their students negotiate this process going forward, because adolescence, as probably everyone knows, having been through it, is a very, very tempestuous and difficult time, and we need to have caring adults responding in ways that will help structure their decision-making and make them very clear to them that they have a place, they're included, and they are vital parts of the future. We need to do this work not just with our retraining our staff, but we also need to do this with our families and our communities. One of the things, and I'll stop because there's lots to say, is that in our applications for grants, Race to the Top applications, the creation of what we would characterize as implementation mechanisms or systems for implementing important changes, we created a partnership committee called Families and Community Support Systems that is designed to address the issues of how we can support students in a way that will both bring structure, discipline, yet an extraordinary sense of caring to the schools that we hope for in our reform work. This is not soft. This is as hard a piece of work as trying to nail down the better techniques for teaching reading and mathematics. This is the essentials of what I would characterize as a good, strong school climate, and we've made policy decisions, I think, to move us in that direction.
As far back as slavery. Okay? Slavery in and of itself was a mechanism designed to control and punish individuals. Think about it. After slavery ended, well, during slavery, they had these things called slave codes. As slavery ended, they had Jim Crow. You had chain gangs. In modern times, we moved to the war on drugs, which has disproportionately impacted the same group of men. In recent times, because of zero tolerance policies, we've seen the same type of approach that has been used for hundreds of years now starting to be used in schools. And that is the criminalization of minority males. I know that's a hard statement in my first statement to make, but we have a family talk. And sometimes in families, you have to be able to say what needs to be said if you're going to help the family address the issues that are necessary to bring healing. So what I want to do today is to talk about a few things. One of the things we need to talk about is exactly what are the complexities of the issues. Now, a simple framework that I use in my courses is to talk about the who, what, when, and where of a problem. The who, what, when, where. If we talk about who, we're asking the question, who does this problem impact the most? If we ask the question, what, we're talking about how often or what categories can we place these occurrences within? The what? If we talk about when, we're trying to talk about when is this thing clustered? It's the issue of time and space, or really an issue of time. Is it happening when they're younger, when they're older, middle school? It's the issue of timing. Then we ask the question of where. That's the issue of place and space, location. So let's take a look at that, if we can. The who, and this has been alluded to already, so I won't stick here. If we talk about Black and Latino children in the state, they only constitute about 30% of kids, 3 out of 10, right? So if all things being equal, what percentage of disciplinary referrals should they equal? That's not a rhetorical question. 30. If all things being equal, they should represent their population. Instead, what we have is, if you look at suspensions and disciplinary referrals, these two groups constitute over 60% of all the disciplinary referrals. That type of disproportionality is impossible to achieve by simply thinking about individual behavior. There are systems and patterns of thinking and policies in place that is promoting these disproportionate representations. 60% when they're only 30% of the population. That's the who. Now let's get more specific. African American Latino males only constitute 15% of all of the people in the state. So, not a rhetorical question, if all things being equal, what percent of disciplinary referrals, suspensions, expulsions should they represent? 15%, right? Well, in fact, they represent over half of all disciplinary referrals. Half. Which means that when you really look at discipline across the state, we don't have a problem with discipline. We actually have a problem with how we relate to and view African American and Latino males. You see, in order for us to really, before we talk about how to solve it and why we have the problem, we have to first talk about the complexity of the problems, or its malpractice. Imagine you go to the doctor, you sit down and say, "Doc, I'm not feeling good." He said, "Okay, tell me what's wrong." Before you can talk, stick you with a needle, walk out the room, say, "You need to leave." The appointment is over. That is malpractice. So, in order for us to really have a refined set of solutions, we have to first talk about the complexity of the problems. So that's the who. The what talks about how can we categorize these things. So 6 out of 10 suspensions in the state is related to school-based policy violations, not to what zero tolerance policy was designed to fix, which is violent, drug, and guns and weapons in schools. That's only 5% of all the problems. So 6 out of 10 times, if a young person is suspended in our state, they're being suspended because of school-level violations, most of which are acts of defiance. Acts of defiance. We're going to come back to that one. What we know, this is important also, because if we understand how children develop, we'll understand how to help them. So in the 5th grade or in the 6th grade, the number of children suspended in the state doubles. Question becomes, why? If the majority of these are African American and Latino males, what is going on in the social, emotional, cultural development of males in the 5th, 6th, 7th grade that might be causing them to be defiant? When they get to high school, in the 9th grade, the rate of suspension doubles again, up to 22%. What might be going on in the lives of a 14, 15-year-old young male that might cause them to become more defiant? You see, if we don't talk about the complexities, we really can't solve the problem. It's like trying to play darts and you're blindfolded. You know the dartboard is that way, and you're just going to keep throwing the darts. If we don't talk about the complexities. So that's the when. Now the where, location is the key to real estate. It's also the key to discipline, apparently, too. If we look at Derg I, those are our economically most disenfranchised communities. Hartford, New Haven, New London, etc. Children in those districts are 18 times more likely to be suspended than children in dirt A. 18 times more likely. 18 times more likely. In other words, and here's one of the major problems. In dirt G through I, when we look at kindergartners, we're talking about 5-year-olds, kids. My daughter's, she just went to first grade. Kids in G through I constitute kindergartners, constitute 93% of all disciplinary actions. Kids. Now, the achievement gap starts that early. Some studies suggest that there's around a 6-month achievement gap in terms of skills. So you may have a kid who comes to class in kindergarten and they can recognize their letters, they know most of the sounds. You may have a kid who being introduced to the alphabet, but that's a 6-month gap to close. That's not that difficult. If you've raised children, you taught them alphabet, you know that that's not too difficult to do. But if that child is missing days in school, that adds to the problem. Now, here's what we know nationally. We know that if you're an African American kid nationally, and you miss more than 2 days of school, the possibility that you will meet national standards on assessments decreases by 18%. So the question is, if we really want to close the achievement gap, we have to also close the back door. It's letting in the breeze. That breeze is suspensions, expulsions, and things that take kids out of the classroom with capable teachers. So we have to close that gap. And finally, let me close by saying this. The solution, in my view, if we properly define the parameters of the problem, it has to deal with the needs of males. Now, here's a caveat. Much of disruptive behavior is actually characteristics of male leadership. Think about, I challenge anyone to find me an African American male leader in the United States of America ever who has not displayed disruptive behaviors. I'll pay you $200.
Read my bio, so you know that this is not something new for me. This is something that I live. It's not just a work that I do. AFCAMP as an organization served probably in our population more than 50% of our families whose children have been somehow touched the justice system or at risk of touching the justice system. And as Marlon has talked about, this is not a new issue. This is, I tell parents and individuals in our community that this is hidden into the 4th generation. And so when we look at our prison population and look at our juvenile population, they somewhat mirror. So it's a continuum. When we started to get involved in juvenile justice, I mean, our core mission is education, to help our families raising children with disabilities to access appropriate education services. I had no thought in my mind that I would have to be involved in advocating in the juvenile justice system. I thought it would just be education. But soon into our organization existence, I had so many parents coming into my office in tears because their children with disabilities had been referred to the justice system. And after taking time and really looking at trying to really understand why, only to realize that most of it was failure to implement child find. And when we talk about the overrepresentation of children of color in special education, it's the same thing. And when you look at even IDEA regulation on Part C, early intervention and intervention, it's the same thing. I'm coming from an early summit where we're talking about the issue of failure to identify the needs, and these children don't necessarily have to have a disability or need high intense intervention, but awareness about certain strategies and things that families need to be looking at and being aware of so that they can be proactive and preventive in making sure that their children access appropriate education and services that they need in order to be whole. And as we started to look at this issue and trying to understand that Connecticut had been cited by the federal government over 15 years prior for the amount of individuals that were entering the justice system, especially those of color. So I'm saying, well, 15 years ago, what's being done? only to find again that our legislators did research that says, okay, implement juvenile diversion program in all of your urban communities. So I'm like, well, if we paid $200,000 to do a research and we've been cited by the federal government, where are they? This is 15 years later. I have 600 kids going per year. What have we done? It was sitting on a shelf. No one knew about it. No one in my community knew. No one in the legislators knew. Something is wrong here. And the hard part for us as families, which when Dr. James talks about that there's something wrong, when we have individuals in system who have this information and are not acting on it appropriately, and then we have families in our community who are struggling, searching for help, suffering every day, and not getting the information so that they can act on it, that's a major problem, okay? And I know we're probably a state that really don't spend a lot of dollars in prevention, but I always believe prevention is better than cure. You know, and because even though we've passed the law, there's been laws passed, so many on the books, but if the people who are impacted by it don't know what those laws are, don't know what the components of those laws are not able to advocate for themselves, then change is never going to happen. IDEA is over 30 years old. I just did a community forum Monday in the community because we continue to educate. And one of the parents said to me in the meeting, how long has this child find law been around? Okay? When I talked about family, they said, how long has that been around? So there's still a lot of work to do to educate the community so that they can understand and be a part of the solution. And it's not just talking from a boardroom or a conference room. You really need to take a lot of this information on the ground to where the families and the youths are impacted so that they know. Because as much work as we've done in the state of Connecticut, Department of Children and Family, Core Support Services with the whole Juvenile Justice Strategic Plan and multiple partners and advocates, there's still families and youth in our community that do not know that people are really out there trying to advocate and make changes for themselves. So there's still that relationship, that stigma on both ends, that you don't care about me, you don't want me to succeed, you know, and all these other issues that really impact the problem. But I'm hoping that as part of this discussion and all of us coming together, that we'll be able to take this further and continue the dialogue on multiple levels so that we all can really be a part of the solution.
Good afternoon. So first, this is a church, so this is call and response, right? Good afternoon. Here we go. All right. First, I do want to extend my thanks to this incredible and Los Angeles Unified School District that were instrumental in passing school district policy around teacher-led positive behavior support efforts, right? Techniques that schools could use to improve the climate, to improve the learning environment, cut down on exclusionary discipline. It's juvenile court judges in the Deep South, in Georgia, where my colleague Letitia Smith-Evans works a lot, in Alabama, where I've spent most of my time working, that have partnered with school districts, community organizations, mental health providers, law enforcement, to cut down on students' exposure to the juvenile justice system for the things that the judge says, they don't belong in my court for. Right? So we're at this point where we are coming together, and you get a sense of the many voices that need to be involved in this, and the many stakeholders that need to be involved in this are reaching a common ground. And I want to encourage all of us to find ways to do that here during this meeting and beyond. One effort that we're involved in, and a number of people in this room, I saw Abby Anderson and others, is the Dignity in Schools campaign, which is our effort as civil rights groups, community organizations, educator groups, parent groups, student groups, to speak with one voice on these issues and bring attention on the local, state, and federal levels. What I need to come back to now, however, is where we're at and where we've come from nationally. Right now, our latest statistics, and these come right from Russell and Ali's office. Is Russell in the building? Or
on our way.
Not on our way in. All right, all good. We now have a suspension number of 3.3 million students being suspended every school year at least once across the United States. Right? This is a 9% bump from where it was just 6 years prior at rate level, not adjusting for student enrollment. Over 100,000 students are expelled each school year in our schools. That's a 15% increase than where it was 4 years before that. We know that those are the numbers nationally. When we look deeper, just as Dr. James was saying, at our middle schools, we get to astounding rates. For example, there are districts in this country, Milwaukee among them, that average a 50% student enrollment suspension rate, which means 1 out of every 2 students is suspended during the school year. And the numbers that we have are what we call an unduplicated head count, meaning that this number only tracks the students who've received a suspension. It doesn't tell us how many of those students received more than 1, more than 2, more than 3, more than 4, which are those indicators that we know are the concern in our schools, right? When we see a student who is that far behind or has that many suspensions, we know that's a red flag that something's going wrong and we need to intervene. We need to figure out what sort of services and supports have to take place to bring that student back up to speed, because all the research is there. Bob Balfence, the same man who did the study on dropout factories that we've probably all read, required reading for our jobs, has found that the 2 clearest indicators for juvenile and adult incarceration when looking in the middle school grades is being 2 years behind in reading level and receiving suspensions. Right? That's it. Those are the 2 leading indicators. So for us, discipline numbers, suspension, expulsion are very clear predictors of what's coming down the line. The Center for Disease Control weighed in on these issues. They found that suspension and expulsion were predictors and made youth more likely to engage in out-of-school delinquent behavior, more likely to be retained a grade in school, more likely to drop out, more likely to be involved in the juvenile and criminal justice systems. And then when we get to something deeper that Representative Murphy alluded to earlier, school arrests. We know that the first time a student ever is arrested by an officer or taken away from school by juvenile court, they're twice as likely to drop out. The first time they appear in front of a judge, they are 4 times as likely to drop out. And we're seeing this come in waves in this country that we've never seen before. Okay? We don't have good national data on what's happening with arrests in our schools. Russell and Ali is changing that. That's something that's collected now and going to be reported to all of us hopefully this fall to get a sense of what's happening nationally. But if we want to look a little bit about what's happening at the state level, for example, in Pennsylvania, between the years of 2002 and 2008, the school arrest rate tripled from approximately 4,500 to 13,000. When you look at the state of Florida, you have 22,000 students being arrested annually, and that number is actually down now because of the state's efforts to try to address it. The state of Florida itself has better data than most, and it's something that I think we're going to get a sense of nationally later on. But according to their resources, it looks like right now 69% of the arrests that happen in Florida schools happen not because of weapons possession, happen not because of drug possession, happens not because of violent incidents, but what the state describes as misdemeanor arrests. These are things that too often are now being referred to the juvenile courts and to law enforcement that you and I used to and probably still try to handle with a call home as best we can. All right? These are minor offenses that have changed dramatically in our schools. Now you have a panel coming up to talk about the stronger solutions that we have, including my good friend George Sky, who's doing this work so well on the national level to raise awareness on these issues. But I want to take a look very briefly at a couple districts that have faced these problems and have worked to solve them collectively between teachers, community members, parents, and the broader forces at play. Now I just spoke briefly on school arrests, and I want to take a look at the Deep South in Clayton County, Georgia, where you had a school district that in 1995 had 35 arrests during the school year of students. In 2003, They've shot up to 1,300, right, or 1,283 was the exact number. Now, the district had expanded its school resource officer program. All of us who are educators know that it's our job to make sure our students are safe, right? Because if we don't maintain a safe environment, we're not maintaining a learning environment. Our students will not engage. But what developed so perniciously in Clayton County, Georgia, was something that when you speak with the school resource officers and the juvenile court judge there, is a de facto default sort of discipline. According to their records, the Clayton County Court found that 90% of the students who were being arrested for misdemeanors, what the judge described as disrupting public school, defiance, disrespect. And when you talk to the resource officers, they say that what would happen is a teacher would report a student to one of them or to the principal. If the student mouthed off to the principal, he got a warning. If he mouthed off again, the principal's punishment was not, I'm calling your parents, not you go into detention, not you're getting suspension. It was, you're being arrested. And as soon as that happens, what the resource officer said, I'm not there to protect the school. I'm not there to protect the school from intruders. I'm shuttling kids back and forth to juvenile court, wasting our resources, wasting my resources, and wasting the juvenile courts as well. This is a huge problem for all the levels that we're dealing with. We know the effect on academics. We know the effect on the dropout rate. And until we address these things with the solution that the next panel will present, we're going to lose a generation of students in the name of policies that don't make our schools safer or make them the types of engaging places that we want them to be.
You hear a lot of things from school districts and teachers and principals when we talk about this issue, but two of the most frequent are these. One, they have a hard time explaining why they feel that they're getting different and more emotionally complex kids today than they had in the past. That they feel like there is certainly a change in school discipline, but what you hear routinely is that they're getting children that have much more emotional complexity to it. It can be at times harder to educate in the classroom, and it's something that comes up over and over again. The second is a concern about resources. That even if they, and I think Merva made a great point about just the lack of information that's out there, and that's something we have to talk about that comes up, is that they don't have the resources to do some of the things that they know would work. So I'd maybe just present those two questions to the panel and invite others to come up to ask other questions, but a question about the changing nature of the types of students that school districts are getting and the difficulty confronting these problems that we're seeing with resources.
We see trauma is a major factor, and it's not just the trauma of poverty, but even in our society, family structures, changes in the environment of the family. Kids come to school with those issues if they're affected at home. And depending on the response that is provided to them, whether it's a true assessment of what the issues are and to be able to look at how do we coordinate those services in a complex way to meet those needs and partner with the school system, what I see is a failure in that area. The second part is stigma. You know, when Marlon talks about how our children from the various community are viewed and who are the teachers in the classroom, do they really understand, are they culturally competent to really understand what are some of the issues and what do they see and how do they judge those families? And how do those students feel? Because a student know immediately whether you really believe in me or care about me or not, and they respond in that way. In regards to resources, I think one of the issues, I sit at many tables where we're trying to address this issue, and one of the major missing link is the educational partnership. Every table that I go, not only state, local, or nationally, is that we need the educators to be at the table, and they're missing. And I know that it's difficult in your schedule, but one of the things I always share with my colleagues is that, you know, education feel that if it's identified, then they're responsible to spend money to do it, and money is tight. But there are so many systems who have mandates and resources that if we really partner together and come together, we can help the school system to address those issues. And that is a piece that's critically missing. And if we could really bring that partnership and collaboration cross system, we can be more effective in support of the education system in addressing that piece.
At the microphone, but let me actually quickly shift to another question that actually is directed towards Dr. James and to Matt. You guys presented some incredibly compelling statistics, and you started to get at this question. But the next question is why? Why have, I mean, what's changing? I mean, I suggested something that the types of kids are changing, but what do we know, what data do we have, or what information do we have about the why behind those numbers with regard to a change in the type of children that we're talking about, a greater concern for zero tolerance as a way of dealing with this, or other changes in disposition about how we view discipline? What do we know about why those numbers have changed so quickly?
I'll piggyback.
So, Representative Murphy, great question. I'm going to answer it slightly different. The issue is not what's changing. The children are predominantly the same children they've always been. All kids have issues. Every kid has issues in every community. Every kid has issues because adults have issues, right? So the issue is not what's changing in terms of are the kids changing, are the families changing? Of course we're changing. But the real question is what has not changed? What we have not done, we have not collectively as a people come together to have heartfelt conversations and serious conversations about how we view each other as human beings. We have not done that. We've ended slavery. We ended desegregation. Well, we still try to send people back across the border. That's a problem. We've tried to deal with quite a few issues that have really separated our society, but we have never done something very interesting. We have never institutionalized education about who we are as a people and how to get along to our children. We have not done that in curriculums in schools. We have not done that with our teachers. They're not properly prepared to go into schools. Our leaders are not properly prepared to deal with all the cultural dynamics that come with a diverse society. And what we also know that has not changed, America is still highly segregated. It's going to take us another 115 years to desegregate at our current rate of desegregation. Segregation has been illegal for almost 2 generations. These are things that have not changed. Now, some other things that haven't changed. Under slavery, and as slavery ended, there was a way of thinking about black people. It was a way of thinking that suggested that we were biologically inferior. It was in our genetics. That soon changed as desegregation happened. Scholars started to look at the information and said, no, you're not biologically inferior, you're culturally deprived. Then we desegregated schools. And we have yet to address that way of thinking that suggests that communities, children, and African American, Latino, Native American cultures are pathological. We have yet to address that. And until we address that, it does not matter what program we use, it does not matter how many degrees teachers have. If you do not see a person as fully human, you will not be able to educate them. And you will not be able to craft a policy that humanizes them when it's done by dehumanizing ways of thinking.
As brief as possible, some folks at the University of Virginia did an exhaustive study of the disciplinary rates, practices, policies of their state. When they looked at the differences between the schools with high discipline rates and low discipline rates, it wasn't about the race of the students. It wasn't about socioeconomic status of the students. It wasn't about high poverty versus low poverty schools. The greatest common denominator, or the thing that strung it all together, was basically the school principal's approach to discipline. And if a school principal felt that zero tolerance was the approach that would work best for disciplining the school, that dictated that school had the highest suspension rates, the highest expulsion rates. Coincidentally, those were also the schools in other studies where the teachers have been most dissatisfied, did not feel like the principal actually had their back, so to speak, right? And instead, found that where you have a school that has a preventative or sort of an assertive discipline policy that's fair and consistent and built around preventative, proactive measures, you have created a school culture that works better for the students and the teachers alike.
Just say your name.
I'm sorry. I'm Gwen Samuel. I'm a parent. I'm under Congressman Murphy's district. I'm also the founder of the State of Black Connecticut Alliance, which convenes stakeholders around the issues of building strong communities and vulnerable communities with a focus on Black communities. And Professor Marlin and I had the pleasure of being invited to an unconscious bias training. The California Teachers Association came to Connecticut, and I went, it was hosted by CEA, the Connecticut Education Association. And it was such a profound training about how we perceive individuals. It talked about race, it talked about gender. And I remember having this brief conversation with Commissioner Ficklin in regards to when Race to the Top was being brought to Connecticut. And I had a concern around multicultural education being optional. So if our communities are growing steadily, diversely, and you're talking about urban communities, and we're talking about perceptions, and we're talking about reality, and we're talking about differences, I couldn't understand as a parent, as a person of color, that how can the conversations and the trainings needed to help us understand one another. So you don't have to like me, but you must respect me, right? We must respect where people come from, and we must figure out how to work together for the common goal of ensuring economic, educational success. So my question to you, Commissioner McQuillan, and I'm going to have this question probably until my head grows cold, is why is it optional? Especially after the trainings out there that talks about human nature and our belief systems and our value system, the core things that make us who we are, that can make us unconsciously implement policy that can adversely, disproportionately impact one class of people over another. So again, you just have to answer for me, maybe publicly, then we can talk about it. Why is it optional for educators to take multicultural educational training as an option versus a mandate, knowing the conditions and the community demographics of Connecticut?
I think the question you're posing is how you address this problem through a program per se. And I would probably answer it this way. It's entirely possible that we could require this and build this into our series of course requirements that we have at our secondary school reform plan. And in fact, that could be something that we would perhaps make an adjustment of the secondary school plan, which has been something that has been part of our thinking in the next several years. But from my perspective, I don't know that a course per se is going to carry the day. And I think from my perspective, where we're headed is actually to look at this systemically, because it's not a single course. It's the sort of thing that you want to build into the teacher preparation programs that we create. We build it into our work on how we mentor new teachers. We build it into our secondary school reform by how we train teachers to provide the supports. We have to make it, in a sense, universal rather than a single event. And I think that from our perspective, there's nothing really voluntary about that. We're making it in part of the training that we expect to go through as we implement secondary school reform. It is part of the work that we are bringing into the turnaround work with our districts that we're partnering with. We have a whole module on diversity training and courageous conversations about race. So we are trying to take this whole thing from the whole perspective of what it takes, I think, to educate an entire education community and an entire group of teachers long term. And so I don't know that any single way to getting at the issue, but it is certainly on our radar as a very important issue. And as a matter of fact, I think the energy that has been expended by the department around this question of supports, student success planning, a comprehensive look at a system of suspension healthy environments, healthy support for families, the full commitment to community support programs to get families invested in. We're there, and it may not be to your level of expectation at this point, but we are there in what we want to attain. And I don't know that a mandate per se or a something required is going to get us there. I don't think that, I'm just, without sounding defensive, we have essentially eliminated a number of things that would discriminate against people of color, and yet it still persists. So the law is insufficient. It's a whole attitudinal change that needs to be fundamentally the core focus of what we do. And we have to talk about race really and seriously and honestly. And we have to realize that our teaching force needs a whole education, future and current, about how to do that work well. So I think that would be my response to it.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Interested in getting down to the nitty-gritty of less conceptual things. I know there's a lot of good data out there. There's a lot of great minds working on the problem. What I see in my high school are really good educators who are being, they're going to professional development, they're going to programs, they're getting training with PowerPoints, taking notes, and yet they return to school and they're not confident in generalizing the skills they're learning to address behavioral problems in the classroom. And it's just one event that can, an interaction between a teacher and a student will explode into something so awful. And from the student support end of the school, we're overwhelmed with dealing with the after effects of those interactions. And I think teachers want to do a better job with behavioral issues, but are there any models out there? And I always think that if we had more like actors workshops for teachers, if they were actually in an environment with kids trying this stuff so that when they return to school, they're more confident implementing it. Enough PowerPoints, enough talking about it, give them something to dig into so that when they come back, they know what it looks like and they can implement it. They have the right words in a moment, because choosing the right words in a moment is absolutely critical to diffuse a tense situation. So I think there's a lot of people who want to do the right thing, but I think we have to start using technology, using video role modeling, disseminating information so people can see, what does it look like? How can it look in my classroom? And I think we would have a better situation for all students.
About how positive behavior supports embeds these practices in the school so that it becomes a common language for all the teachers to use, all the students to use, all the staff to use when dealing with conflict and when addressing expectations for how students are to behave in the school and how adults are to behave in the school. That matters big. I carry around a card on restorative justice which has 4 questions that students can ask each other or that teachers can ask students to resolve or take the first steps to resolving a conflict. And it's the repeated aspects of these that we take to embed within the school day to day that make a difference. When I mentioned what happened in Clayton County, Georgia, that judge sat down the partners, the community organizations, the parents groups, the law enforcement agencies, and the school district itself and said, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that we handle safety, you guys handle discipline, and never the two shall meet. And it becomes a process. They wrote up a protocol that everybody received training in. It wasn't a one-and-done training, but something that was consistently reinforced throughout the school day, throughout the school year, so that everybody was on the same page. As a result, serious incidents down 70%, graduation rate up 20%.
My universe. It's a sensitive issue. And
Talk right into the mic, so is this again?
it's a sensitive issue in that as a professor of color at University of Connecticut, part of what I was recruited to do was to deal with this issue of urban education and preparing leaders and educators to do better in urban schools. But because the state does not create the opportunity for there to be courses, much of the time, most of the experts that we have at our university, and I know other professors at other universities throughout the country, our hands are tied. We have their information, but because there's no room in the curriculum, our hands are tied. Now, an option that we took in our leadership preparation program is we put it throughout every single course. It works great. We put it in every single course. The problem is we still need one course that deals with it very deeply. That's what we're missing. If we had that, we'll have, I think, one of the best preparatory systems for urban educators that I've seen. But the challenge is creating an opportunity for the people who can do the work to do the work. Another note is simply because you're in a room and you're getting trained, that training has to be in line with best practices for teaching adults, not best practices for teaching children, because professional developers are not teaching children, they're actually teaching adults. The challenge is adult education is a very specific subset, and if you watch an adult educator versus a K-12 educator teaching the exact same lesson to adults, you get a totally different lesson and totally different outcomes. And so part of what we have to do, and I think the commission can help us with this, is to create a space where the urban and multicultural educators can get together and determine what is best practices for training, for teaching, for developing leaders who are multicultural and who can work in urban environments. But that opportunity, that space has to be created. And we need that desperately.